Thanks for joining us today on The Perfect X. My name is Sherry, and this is my co host, Leigh.
Hello.
And today we are talking about setting healthy boundaries.
Indeed, we are.
This is a good one. I mean, I don't know how we're going to beat last week. Last week's was so good.
That's
Mostly,
all right.
it really made me think twice about asking you instead of Taryn.
Well, there's a lot of qualified people, but I was the only one willing to work for the money you offered.
I know, right? And not a lot of people are willing to work for text.
The contract was something like "do it or else."
I think I said more than or else. I said, do it or I'll burn your house.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, this is a really good one because I don't know about you, but actually I do know about you because I think you're the same. But
Mhm.
I absolutely had no. I mean, we didn't even fucking know what boundaries were growing up.
No.
So, and we're people pleasers. Like most people who make jokes and think they're funny are people pleasers. So,
Yeah, I can see that.
and I think, I mean, I know you are too. Like you're always the first one to jump in and help. So,
Mhm.
um, this was a really fucking hard one for me to learn. You know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we talked about it a little bit last time on podcast, but so much of it is like just respecting someone else's boundaries, even if they don't always make sense to you. I think that was a big one for me. Like prior to with being with Taryn, it was always like trying to almost like convince the other person that they're wrong or their boundaries are like silly or whatever it is. And then for me, when I was just like something clicked where I was like, I don't need to necessarily share the same feelings on a certain boundary to agree that or to value it. I guess
That was like when you said that last week, I was like, "Oh my God," like that is something I have such a hard time with. Like, especially my sense of humor versus like my sister or mom's and like they'd be like, "Well, I'm not really comfortable with that." I was like, "Oh, what's the big deal?" Like, but you're right. Like I was always trying to prove why that joke isn't rude. But
Yeah,
it's like you don't have the right to do that. If someone has a boundary, you have to accept it. And that's just it. They're
yeah.
asking you to respect it. You don't have to make sense of it. And
And on
it
the other
was
side of the
such a
coin
light
too,
bulb.
like for us, if people don't like our personalities, like you could try to do relationships different than like friendships. But I think like for
For
me,
sure.
if I have people that are don't jive with my personality, I still have people I consider like a friend, but we just don't hang out all the time. But within a relationship standpoint, like it's definitely more like I want to. I'll respect your boundary, even though I don't necessarily share that view. It's like it's important to you. Then that's sort of it's and that's hard to wrap your head around. It's the
It
instinct
was,
is to
it
argue,
was.
right?
Like when you said it, I was like, "Oh my God, like how has that never?" But it's such fucking common sense. Like when you said it, it wasn't like this complicated solution. It's just a fact. Like the
Yeah,
reality is you can't force someone to agree with you. That's what they're saying, and that's it.
that's how they
Like, and I was
feel.
like,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, how come I never thought
Well,
of that
so much
before?"
of my adult life and like maturing has been like being like that, like not having to force my point across to be like I'm right and you're wrong. It's just to be like that's where you're at, and I just need to respect that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a hard one. It's a hard one. That's a
It
hard one.
is,
And
but it solves a lot of conflict when you stop trying to convince other people to go your way. I think that's been a big one for
exactly.
me. I'm just like, oh, I understand that's how you feel, and I can work with that.
I'm gonna put it into practice with everything. So,
It makes a big
but
difference, like just in life in general, just conflict resolution and stuff like that. I think you don't have to convince the person that they're wrong in your opinion. You're just okay. That's how you feel. That's fine. Like you don't
yeah,
have to. We don't have to be on the same exact page. We just need to know that's where we're both at.
exactly. Oh, I loved it. Well, I think exactly when we're thinking about relationships, a lot different than other like friendships and stuff. Because with friendships, you can keep a distance, but with relationships, you're trying to build, like you're
Yeah,
trying to build a foundation. And I think, you know, I know for our generation, it's something that most of us have a hard time communicating. But I actually just put this into practice recently in the last few years, and I've noticed such a shift in the way I connect with people. And I'm sure you're going to give examples too of like once you implemented it with your marriage,
hmm
I'm sure there was a big shift. And one of the biggest shifts I realized is instead of expecting someone to know what is right and wrong for me, was communicating, which is the hardest part, is actually saying like, look, like for me, for example, one is people who are late. If you're even 5 minutes late, it really irks me. And how we used to talk is we used to say, oh, it's a pet peeve.
hmm
But pet peeve means like what you do annoys me. But actually, a boundary is so different than that. A boundary is, listen, I feel devalued, which is more than just a pet peeve. It's not that I'm annoyed. I actually feel like you think I'm worthless when you come late.
Yes.
And that's completely different than just being like, "Oh, I don't like, oh, like, like you're annoying me, you're irritating, what you do is wrong." It's really just focusing on how I feel about something and setting a boundary around it. And I
Mhm.
realized, like, for instance, I go on dates with people before, and like if they showed up 20 minutes late, if they were picking me up, I wouldn't even come downstairs.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's so rude. And I was so aggressive about it. I wasn't communicating in a way that was like healthy. And because I wasn't like, we're not raised that way. Like, it's just saying in boundaries or something, or like, I don't know, the new generation, they're all woke and they do it, but we didn't. We were really like the type of things of, it's like, I'm a princess. I expect these things. This is how I want you on time. I want you to pick me up. Like those, that was how things were perceived that way.
Mhm.
But
But that's
when I
fair
started,
boundaries, right? Like if that, like, like I had
if
a
you're, if you communicate it like a boundary,
yes, yeah. Instead of
that's the
it's
difference.
funny, like people being late is a big one for me too. And I've literally stopped hanging out with people who can't get where they're supposed to be when they say they're supposed to be. And I was like the same camp as you. Like I had friends that would say they were going to be somewhere. And it wasn't like 10 or 15 minutes. It'd be like an hour. And they couldn't
Yeah,
be
yeah.
bothered to let you know. And it was always like he didn't see it as a problem. And I was like, well, I do. And then we argued sort of we would argue about it, or it would just be an issue. Like I would wait at say 30 minutes at my house and he wouldn't show up. So I would just leave. And then I'd get
Well,
a
and
phone call like, where are you? I'm like, well, after half an hour, I figured you weren't coming. So I got in my car and I went to the party myself.
yeah, and the thing is, the way we used to express things were more out of irritation versus, like, communicating what it does and why you need it,
Yeah.
and that's the thing, like, so that guy probably walks away thinking like, "Oh, you're an asshole
Yeah.
because you couldn't wait," and you walk away thinking, "Well, you make me feel like I'm pathetic and stupid and I should just wait around for you 24/7."
Yeah. And I
And
think
so
that turning point for me was that I was like, okay, I've said my piece. He knows how I feel. He still chooses to not make an effort to be on time. And then we just like terminated the friendship. Like it wasn't like a blowout. I was just like, okay, I'm done. I'm no longer gonna call this guy and make plans with
to
him
do
because this is how I feel. I feel strongly that it's disrespectful to be late, especially every time, and especially by like a lot. And he just didn't feel that way. So I was okay. You know what? I'm not going to waste any more of my time trying to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong or whatever. And that was when I first really remember sticking to my boundaries and be like, you know what? Like he's told me it's not a big deal. I've tried going along with that and I disagree. Like it is a big deal
right.
and I'm out. Like we literally just stopped talking and it wasn't like a big blowout or nothing. We just kind of drifted apart. And yeah, that was a mature moment for me because I just gave up trying to prove that I was right.
Right. Well, what I was gonna say, like what I noticed when I was like dating, I instead of like trying to tell men it was like an expectation, I kind of worded as how I feel around it. And I
Mhm,
realized that's the difference between like saying a pet peeve and a boundary. Like, so I started telling guys before dates, like, hey, I'm always on time.
mhm.
And it's really important to me that if you're going to be late or if that time doesn't work for you, I'm happy to adjust the time, but I don't feel valuable when I'm waiting around for somebody.
Yeah.
And that was setting a healthy boundary. Like I really express how it made me feel versus like an expectation of this is what I need from you. And if you're not, you're a piece of shit. I more worded it around like, if you don't do this, it makes me feel worthless. And so I don't appreciate it.
Yeah.
And you have the biggest thing about setting boundaries is flexibility. Like I always tell people like what time works best for you because I know for me it's going to be a big fucking deal even 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So if I say 7 but you mentally want to say yes just to make me happy but 7:30 is better for you or 7:15 is better for you, I want to give the person the opportunity to be like say this is where I can actually make it work. I'm not going to be able to make 7. For me, 7:15 or 7:30 would be better. And then I say, "Great, so let's just do the latest. Let's do 7:30."
Yeah.
So that there's a flexibility, there's communication, there's setting a boundary together in a way that you're happy, you're not feeling rushed because you have to meet this expectation. And I'm also feeling valued because, you are doing the best you can to get there?
Yeah, with you, like, for the being late thing, like, we could go on that topic for days, but we're both of the same opinion that there's virtually no excuse for it unless something comes up where, some extenuating circumstance, but if you're just someone who's late all the time, there's no excuse for that, and,
And
I'm with you, like, it doesn't work for me.
And I also realized, like, for me, for that, like, there are people, and a lot of people around me, like, I love my best girlfriend, but, like, she used to live upstairs, and she would tell me, like, "I'm on my way." But for her, she's such an easygoing person when it comes to time.
Mhm.
So for her, like, half an hour is still on time. Like, it's really not a disrespectful thing. In general,
Yeah.
if I was an hour late to her, she wouldn't be bothered either. And I used to tease her, like, she said, "I'm just putting on my shoes," and then, like, 20 minutes later, she'd come downstairs, but
Yeah.
she wears flip-flops. So I used to tell her, like, "You live up 2 flights of stairs. It doesn't take 20 minutes to put on flip-flops."
Man, I'm
But
just
she
not down with that at all. Like, I'm with
but
you. It's just I'm gonna flip a table here.
but she was never doing it out of disrespect, because for her, it's not her boundary. Like, she has different boundaries. So that's why the communication is important. Like, once I told her, like, "Hey, like, I really don't appreciate it. It makes me feel this way." She
Mhm.
never did it again. But
That's cool.
it's easier to express boundaries when you realize that people aren't trying to make it a personal dig. Like, you take the
Yes.
ego out, right? Like, for some people, the your biggest issue is not their issue at all.
Mhm.
Like, for her, time is not an issue at all. So she never once thought about it. So it's very normal for her. And once you express it, then you have to also, and I realize this too, like, especially with dating, right? Like, when you're with somebody a lot, you have to give them time to hear you,
Mhm.
understand you, as well as make the changes. So you can't expect to express yourself and then from then on, it's always that way. Like, yes, maybe the next time they're on time, because they just had the conversation.
And that's
But
a
then
big part
maybe
of it, yeah.
it's giving room for the change, because maybe it's not as valuable for them. Like, that's not the most valuable thing, is time. And they're always late, and that's how they've lived for 40 years. And now here's someone that's like, okay, 2 minutes is late for me. So
Who are you
now
dating that's 40? Get out of here.
I just went out with a 44-year-old.
Because we're turning 40. This is horrible. Well, you're not. I
Well,
am.
I'm not. I'm turning 38. I
For
still
the
got two
fourth
more
time.
years. I wish I'm turning 22 for the fifth time.
Yeah, it's a big thing, like, where it's one thing when you see someone making an effort to meet you in the middle, or like, to meet you with, like, the time thing or whatever it might be. And I did it it's I there's other factors too. Like, I feel like with there's people, like, I've worked with that literally just couldn't get to work. Like, this girl was telling me, oh, my daughter's, she's like 12 or 13 or something, and I just can't get her in gear in the morning. Like, I'm late because of her. I'm like, well, you're going to be unemployed because of her. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you really need to do something about this, because I'm like, this place doesn't play with being late. Like, they're pretty flexible with a lot of things, but this being late all the time business ain't gonna fly. And I just said to her, I was like, trying to be helpful. I'm like, you got to tell your kid, like, get ready half an hour earlier, or leave her at home. She's 13, right? You don't have to drive her to school. Like, she can't. And I'm sure she'd probably not go to school, but I'm like, that's a whole other thing. But I'm like, you got to do something, and she just didn't, and she ended up getting fired. And I was like, man, like,
Yeah.
she's a single mom, like, with a teenager, and like, I don't have it in me to fire someone like that. I would just, but we rely on these people and the customers rely on these people, and it just, she just couldn't do it. So I guess my point is, I wonder if certain personality traits or things like ADHD, or various types of autism or something like that, are like linked to, like, issues with time management and things.
Yeah. I
So there's
mean,
always
that's
I don't know, maybe I feel like it is. So, there's always outside things, but yeah, it's all down to, like, what you can deal with and put up with.
yeah. Well, that's another thing, right? It's like knowing the difference between a boundary, what is considered a healthy boundary, and what is considered expecting selfish changes. So
Yeah.
I think, like, expecting someone time management and giving them the flexibility to work around it and working together through it in a relationship is, like, normal. But what a difference between what I notice is a lot of people are new to boundaries, and so they start, like, everything becomes a boundary.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people
And
grew up with no boundaries, like,
yeah,
which I think is a big adjustment for them when they get out in the world and they start running into people that don't allow, like, you can't just take my tools off my bench and, like, just not put them back. Like, it's like, there's a lot of things, a lot of boundaries like that. And people that grew up without them. Yeah. Like you say, I think it's even harder for them. Like, you and I grew up with boundaries. Like, you did certain things, and what you said you were going to do. And there's a lot of people that grew up with none, and they just don't understand that, like, oh, you can't find your charger. So you just take mine. Well, that's not how it
yeah,
works, right?
yeah. Well, I mean, I think when it comes to, like, with the relationships and stuff, like, it's really, really important to communicate what you expect, right? So,
Mhm.
but it's just very different between being selfish expectations and being a healthy boundary. And I would say the difference is, something that's important for you to feel loved versus something you need from someone just so that you're kind of on top. And I noticed that in society, we do tend to do that. Like we tend to take in order to make ourselves feel better,
Mhm.
but it's not something that would make us feel love. Like if I eat, like if there's one chocolate there and I don't crave it and I take it from you just so you don't have it, it's not going to make me satisfy craving I didn't even have. I'm just taking it so that I can have exert some sort of power towards my ego, right?
Yeah.
And I noticed a lot of people do that when they're trying to set boundaries, like because they want to like make sure like the guy likes them more. And I,
Like
I have
testing the
girlfriends
water.
like that. Yeah, they test, they want to make sure like the guy is chasing. Like I know this girl, she's constantly pushing her boyfriend to the edge and calling it a boundary,
Fuck's
making him
sakes.
do something out of his way just to kind of have the upper hand, right?
Yeah, that's a
And
whole other thing,
that's
I'm sure.
different.
Because, like you say, it's
So,
the difference between a proper boundary and then just seeing what you can get away with.
and I think also people need to be aware of that just as much when you're setting boundaries in a relationship. Like, is this to make the person feel loved or is this to gain control? That's the
Yeah.
difference, right?
Mhm.
And I think there are usually 3 to 5 things we all feel a part of who we are as individuals, like that make us who we are and they are significant to our well-being and to our personality and to our growth. And I think when you're setting boundaries, you should really just focus on those 3 to 5 things. Like if it's not something that you feel is part of your being, like for
Mhm.
me, or if, like, and for me, like being respected is so important. And being on time is a form of respect for me. So that's important boundary.
And
You
a
know,
lot of
like
it's just pick your battles, like you're kinda saying, like, is it a
exactly.
boundary, like, say, for Taryn and I, um, we have certain boundaries that are not negotiable, and then we have certain ones where I'm like, I try to do everything to, like, keep like, so she's got like, the whole love language thing from, like, the last podcast is, like, she like for me like I'll for example she's like, oh, my cord in my car for my CarPlay is shitting out, so I'll order her another one, right? Like, so she has one, and she, it's not a big deal, it was $10 whatever, and but it's just that, like, she probably wouldn't do it for herself, so like for me it's always like trying to make sure that she has what she needs, and then I'm the same way, like everything's where I need it, my tools, my desk for my chargers and all my stuff, and she like just will get into my stuff and be like, "Oh, well, I can't find my charger, so I took yours." And then she forgets to put it back, and then I hit the roof. But I've come to like live with that. Like, I'm like, she's trying, and I try to do what I can to make sure she's got what she needs. And then the odd time she does take my stuff, she tries to put it back, and that's a boundary. And my when
That's
I
the
was growing up,
flexibility part
yeah,
you're
we were
talking
I
about.
was being
Yeah.
flexible about it. To me, it's a big deal. Like, I really don't like people taking my things. I don't like going to grab something that's not where I left it. Like, it just drives me nuts. And when I was a kid, like, there was none of that. Like, we were very, it was a lot of boundaries. You never touch somebody else's things, and all that. So anyway, we've kind of like, well, there is boundaries that we're hard and fast on. And then there's boundaries like that. If I had my way, she would never touch my things, but you know, it's not all
But
day, every day. And
that's
I
not
can,
gonna it's not like something
not
that's
a
gonna
deal
attack your
breaker.
personality, and it's not gonna attack your core of your being kind of thing.
Right,
But
and
like
that's just
a
a
good
compromise type, she's trying to
exactly.
not do that, and I'm trying to be more forgiving about that,
Yeah.
so I don't just come in guns blazing, "Where's my phone charger?"
And one big one, like I see, and I've seen this actually in couples, like somebody is very sarcastic, like you and I,
Mhm.
and the other person, and so like one thing I like for me, a huge another boundary besides like time, another one is someone who can understand that my sarcasm isn't intent to hurt. Like I
Right.
do cross the boundary and I really work on not doing it, but this is really who I am. And so another thing is like when you're trying to set boundaries is like you shouldn't be with someone where you have to completely change them in order to make the situation comfortable.
Yes.
And that's a really big one. So, like, you can set a boundary around someone's personality a little bit without changing them. And one thing I found, like, with somebody like I was with, you know, they were like, okay, I like, don't mind your jokes. You can go as low as the belt as you want, but there's like 2 things I don't want you to bring up. One was like my job, and the other one was like, like this a certain situation with the family.
Right.
And that's a boundary. That's a healthy boundary. He's not asking me not to make jokes, not to be my sarcastic self, not to be like, silent and not like observe something and not try to make something really rude, that
Yeah,
which is what
yeah.
I do.
And
All
that's
I'm
cool. Like
saying is,
that's understanding like
yeah,
your
that's
personality and you're going to make jokes and there's really nothing's off limits except for this and that. And that's a pretty good
and
example
that's
of like
flexible.
flexible.
That's
Yeah.
setting healthy boundaries. That's not asking someone to be completely different. He's not saying, I can't stand your jokes, which I've had guys that are like, I can't stand your jokes. I don't like it. It's not for me. And I'm like, then don't be with me. Like
Yes.
you can't just
Sayonara.
be like, no jokes. Yeah. Setting a healthy boundary doesn't mean completely changing a person. It means like, okay, within your personality, there's just one, two things of this part of who you are that I can't accept. And as me also being someone who should accept someone else's boundaries, I have to accept that. He's not asking much. He's just saying, leave these two things out of it.
Yeah, and
You
that's
know,
cool. That's fair. Yeah. Like
that,
some guys,
those are
like
just
some guys
examples.
are really sensitive about going bald, right? Like I don't give a shit, but like some people, it like ruins their life. Like it really does. So if me and a lot of other guys that are bald always joke about being bald. Like my bosses, both my bosses are bald. Like me, there's a few other dudes, like just same build, shaved heads, like the whole bit. Like we all look pretty similar. We kind of joke that that's like the standard for working here kind of thing. Like it's like we have to have a quota of so many bald people. And a lot of guys don't care, but some guys it just eats them alive. Like they just it's horrible. I feel so bad for anybody that's like really cares about that.
Mm,
So if I pick up on that, even though they're bald and I'm bald, I don't joke about it with them. So it's just
it's a sign of respect.
yeah, just kind of feeling out where
Yeah.
someone's boundaries are, even if they don't say it, because guys are funny about saying what their boundary might be, right? And it's so I have come across people that are like one buddy I knew, he's like he had like three hairs left, right? And he's like, oh, I don't want to shave my head because maybe it won't grow back like thick or
The
whatever. I'm
three,
like, are
the
you
three
fucking out of
hairs.
your mind? And I thought he was like fucking with me. I was like, bro, you look like fucking Charlie Brown, so
Homer Simpson had three hairs.
yeah. And I was like, well, obviously he's in some form of denial here, right? You know what I mean? So I was like, I better not say anything because a bunch of other dudes I worked with were bald and nobody cared. But I was like, this guy obviously is hanging on to a bit of a thread, no pun intended, right? So I'm like, I better not joke about that with him. So if you could pick up on it, usually I'm like you, where I realize too late that I've said something over the line,
Me
right?
too. Me too.
It's like, ooh,
And
that
the
was the
problem
line,
is,
eh?
I always say, like, see, if someone else laughs in the room, I don't feel like I like hit it. Like that person could, the person I made the joke about could be crying, and then someone else laughs. I'm like, but so and so laughed.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we
It's
can't
really
both be
hard.
wrong.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to that thing where you kind of said in the beginning, like you don't need to understand it in order to accept it. Like for me, it was really hard when people would say, like, "Oh, this one thing don't joke about," because I always didn't mind if everything was made fun of. Like my mom used to always say, like it's a Persian saying, like first poke yourself with the needle. If
Mhm.
you don't bleed and it doesn't hurt you, then jab like a whole knife into someone's back, you know?
And then that
But
obviously
it's like,
didn't
it's
work.
kind of like first see if it bothers you. If it bothers you, then don't do it. But if, I mean, I'm not saying the same, right? But it pretty much is like, yeah, exactly. Like if it doesn't hurt you, then feel right to do it to someone else. But if it hurts you, then don't do it to someone else.
Yeah.
And I don't get offended by jokes. So there was like no threshold for me.
And that's the
And I,
problem when people say
it
things like
was the
that to us.
problem.
Yeah.
And, and it took me a long time that when people would be like, this was rude, and I would justify the fact that it wasn't. And after what you're saying now, like earlier, it's like, oh, I don't have the right to justify someone else's boundary. I
Yeah.
have to accept it. And that's like such a healthy way of going about stuff. Like I used to, well, not used to, up until last week we talked about it, but I always felt the need to justify because I didn't understand. And I think when you're setting boundaries in a relationship, you have to realize like you're both coming from different worlds. Like unless you're dating your family member incest, like you're coming from
Is that some
another
white people
family.
joke? Is that
It's okay, I'm saying what kind of joke it is. I was gonna, never mind. But unless you're in a cult, but but the reality is you're coming from two different. No matter how close your upbringing, you are coming from two different worlds, and
Yeah.
someone may not understand your boundary. So as long as you communicate it, which I think also the communication is so key because I find that a lot of times we resent people for things that they don't even realize they're doing.
Yes.
And that's not fair. So if you explain it, so and then you share it and then you work together to create a relationship where at the best you can both respect it. And that means understanding that the person is going to have moments where they fail and you also have to have moments where you give them grace.
Mhm.
So it has to be a healthy way of setting them. And there was another one that I found. I know a couple like they're I love this. Like you know, he's a very big workaholic. He works around the clock. He's always been someone who works. He loves his work. He
Mhm.
lives to work. It's not like he's one of those people like, oh, I have to work because I have to. He lives for working. And if he it's up to him, he would work 24/7.
Hmm.
But they're, you know, obviously a couple and they want to spend time together. And she doesn't get bothered. Like she doesn't get bothered at all. Like she doesn't mind if he has to stop dinner and go answer work calls or go answer emails. It doesn't bother her. But she does at the same time eventually have a threshold. Like everybody doesn't want like everything interrupted where they have to work.
Yeah.
And what I found is like a regular Sunday for them is so amazing. Like, you know, he works even on Sundays. He'll get phone calls for work and stuff. And they like to do like hiking and coffee. First, get a coffee, go for a hike, go for lunch, and then they go to the grocery store and have make dinner together. That's their Sunday ritual.
Hmm.
And she doesn't expect him to completely not be on his phone the whole time. But at the same time, she does expect certain amounts of that time that they spend that whole Sunday together where he's not working.
That's good.
So
Yeah.
they found a healthy medium. Like during the coffee and the hike, he and the grocery shopping, he does not touch his phone. He doesn't even bring his phone. He leaves it at home.
That's
But
good.
once they get home and they're preparing dinner and stuff, oh, and they go for like lunch after. So like there's a good amount, like half the Sunday, where during the activities out and about, he's engaged.
Mhm.
But once they're at home and they're cooking dinner and stuff, if he's got to stop and answer, he can't join in cooking the dinner and he can't, you know, partake in that whole part of the meal and prepping stuff for the during the week, he doesn't. He'll go and he'll work if he has to, if it comes up.
Hmm.
And at that time, she doesn't bother him in any which way. She accepts the fact that he gave up the early part of his Sunday. That's his flexibility. And the end part of like from 4 o'clock on is his ability to go in and out as he needs to be for work. And she accepts it, you
Well, that's
know?
good. Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
a complicated one to navigate, but they obviously found something that works, and I
Yes.
think that's just the main thing is figuring something out.
And even during the week, like the whole day, like from morning till 5 o'clock, she can't bother him at all at work.
Mhm.
If she can, if she needs to, but like let's say like they're doing like let's say because he works from home, like let's say he wants they're grabbing coffee and he gets a work call, she can't say shit. He goes and he works if he's
Right,
got to
he's on the
interrupt
clock
and
and
stuff.
everything, yeah.
But between 5 and 7, like when they're having their dinner, there's no work stuff. And then like afterwards, like if they want to go for a walk or if you know they're watching a movie or whatever, he's got to answer work emails and calls again, then that's her flexible time again. So
Yeah.
he gives up like certain, I think it's more than just 5 to 7, it's like 5 to 8 or 5 to 9, like 4 hours. And then
Yeah.
from he can work from like 9 to 2 in the morning, no problem again.
Hmm.
And he does, and that's just how it is. And they really give each other that amount of time, and there's no in between guilt of it. Like they've accepted that this is what each one of them needs, and that's her boundary is when you're with me during these certain amount of times. And his boundary is other than that, I want to get to a certain place in my career, and I need to navigate around social life and also
Yeah.
having my work.
Yeah,
And
being
they
in certain
respected that.
careers too, it's almost expected that you're available, you know,
Lawyers,
quite often. Yeah, yeah, it's
yeah.
hard, and you gotta have those boundaries, but it's important, and it sounds like they've got it figured out. Because we'll do that too. Like I try to, when I get home, I try to spend time with my daughter, and then with Taryn, and then when she goes, my daughter's supposed to go to bed like 8. She usually drags it out like till almost 9 now. But yeah, I'll try to if I have something I have to do, I'll do it after she goes to bed.
And then I'm sure that Taryn gives you the grace and knows that after this amount of time, like she won't just keep coming and bothering you or complaining. Like, why are you going? You know, like please
Yeah.
just, you know,
I just
and
try
that,
to keep it to a minimum because it's very easy to get sucked into the work life imbalance. So, but yeah, it's just, like if I got to get up early the next morning, I'm like, well, I'm not doing this in the morning. I've got to get this quote off tonight so I
yeah,
can,
yeah.
figure it out. But yeah, it's just figuring that the boundaries thing. So that's going to be as long as you can come up with something. And most people can, I'm sure.
And I think the biggest thing for that is kind of finding a medium in a relationship where like both people feel satisfied, you know?
Yeah.
Like maybe for somebody else, they're like, no, I need the entire Sunday, but I can let you do whatever you want Monday to Friday, you know, and maybe
Yeah.
it's part of Saturday. And it's just kind of finding that medium. Like I know, like I love really successful, driven guys. Like I love that entrepreneur mindset. And if
Mhm.
I'm with a guy like that, I have to accept the fact that he's going to work a lot more than 9 to 5. Like
Right,
that's just
yeah, and
reality.
that's important. You realize that going in, you're like, "Oh, if I'm gonna be with a
Yeah.
guy that's that type of person, yeah, they're gonna be away a lot or busy a lot or.
And I've seen girls that love that type of mindset, but then constantly complain and guilt about their boyfriend or husband doing those things. Like they'll be
Yeah,
like, "Well, he works on a Saturday." Well, that's the type of guy you wanted. Like you have
yeah,
to have expectations that are factual with the situation. Like if
Yes.
you want a certain type of female or male that's like driven, they're more likely going to be working more hours, you know?
Oh yeah, I have
And so
lots of
that's,
friends that own their own businesses and they're 24/7 these guys. Like I don't know how
yeah,
they do it,
yeah.
right?
So I think like really wrapping all of this up, it's like finding what a healthy boundary is versus what is fulfilling an ego satisfaction, you
Yeah.
know? And then kind of picking 3 to 5 that you're really big on, and then others being flexible. Like you said, for instance, like your stuff being used and taken isn't the end of the world. Like that's just flexibility. But,
Yes.
you know, being on time for you is really important. Like, so it's always about what is actually important to who you are as an individual and will help you be feeling loved and be the best version of yourself. And I think really 3 is essential. I would say if you're getting to 5, I would really cap it at that.
Yeah.
And then really communicating it in the sense of not a pet peeve. So it's not like if you don't do this,
I'm not yeah, you're not
you're an
just being
asshole.
nitpicky, right? Yeah, if you
Yeah,
I think if you
yeah.
explain to people like what it is and how it makes you feel, then
It's so much easier to
yeah.
understand when people say that. Like, I know when I was making fun of this person's job, he said, "I it made me feel like I'm not successful enough to date you and that your friends were all thinking I'm some loser." And I was like, "Oh my god, that is I never would have thought that that joke would have made someone feel that way."
Hmm.
So when you make someone understand how it makes you feel versus like, "That was so rude of you," like, "How dare you?" Like, I don't understand how he feels. Obviously, if
Yeah.
I did understand that, I would have never made the joke.
Yeah.
So
It's
when
hard
you're just
to yeah, communicate those things, yeah.
well, reprimanding someone is not communicating how the situation truly is, you
And that's how
know?
it turns into a fight. It's instead of something healthy, like, hey, like I'm not, I'm sensitive about this or that. You just start tearing into them, and then it turns into, well, you do this, and then you do that, and la la la. And it just, and that was like, being young, that's how it would go. And now that I'm older, it's like, hey, this is a. I'm trying to think of an example of a boundary that I have, but I can't. This course, there's probably aren't any, but no, I'm sure
Well,
there
it
is. But
sounds like there's a lot. Don't touch your shit.
yes, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm very funny about that. And but I am, I try to be flexible about it, but I'm trying to think of something that, is like there's no real deal breakers, right? But it's funny how
I think there's a deal breaker, the time one. Like if Taryn was someone who was always like an hour late, you wouldn't have married her. That's
yeah, and I
reality.
think
And there are girls that really I've had guy friends that go pick up a girl that'll be sitting outside of her door for 45 minutes. I dated a guy who would literally be telling me, I'm taking the elevator down. And I would tell him we lived a block away from each other. So when I lived in Yaletown, our apartments were a couple blocks from each other.
Mhm.
Like not even a light. Like there was a stop sign and then it was his apartment. Like
Jeez.
one block in his apartment. And I would say I'm leaving my place. So I have to get on my elevator, go down 22 floors, walk to my car. By then he should have been taking his elevator and coming down waiting outside.
Yeah.
But I would get to his door and I'd be waiting and waiting. 45 minutes in, he would be like, okay, now I'm coming down. He had said it like 5 times in that 45 minutes. And then I'd find out he was like vacuuming, putting away the dishes. It's like,
Ugh.
you could have told me that before I left my house, and I would blow up. And he could, no matter how many times we had these conversations, he would never respect it. So those are deal breakers. I mean, honestly, he did a lot of things to make me break up with him,
Well,
but that was a big one.
that's the importance of dating, though. Like these people you encounter that rush into relationships and then are surprised by issues, that like you got to date, man. Like, and then these are the things you work out that are going to work or not going to work. But I know some people that, they jump right into it and then they're just shocked that there's problems.
Well, we were together for a long time, and in that whole time, that never changed. But it was a deal breaker. So, and I will tell you, because really for me, like someone being late, for me, it's like a real big sign of you're not worth my time. And I can't wrap my head around it being anything other than that. So those
Yeah.
are deal breakers. And so again, like, so you have 3 to 5, you communicate them in a way that expresses why it affects you, and then I think there really has to be patience for boundaries to work. So that's like the number one big thing. Because I do notice I have a lot of friends, like they'll communicate their boundary. And then the next time, like, which is like maybe 2 times after that person did great job, they were on time. And then the third time they were like 15 minutes late or half an hour late and they communicated prior. And my friend will blow up and I'll be like, but they are trying. Like, you have to be patient for
Yeah.
people to change and actually see if there's effort. Like if
Mhm.
they were right on time the 2 times before, they're showing effort. It doesn't mean they won't slip up because it's not as important to them and
Mhm.
they're adjusting for the change, right? So I
Yeah.
think giving people that grace and flexibility is so, so important when setting healthy boundaries in a relationship. Is just give them a moment.
My problem is my friend said to me years ago, and I subscribe to this a lot, and it's a flawed logic, but what he says is, you you either get one of two things from a person, a result or an excuse.
Ooh,
And that's kind of how I've like broken down everything I do. Like if someone gives me a task to do at work, they're like, we need this to happen. Do I come up with a reason why I didn't get it done, or what do I do, or do I just make it happen? And my mentality where I work has always been, I'm just gonna fucking figure it out. You know what I mean? And but in relationships, it's not black and white. And I think that's the thing. Like you're saying, just recognize the effort. And it's like, okay, the result would be getting there on time. Well, they didn't get there on time. Well, is that a failure though? Exactly. It's like, well, not exactly. Like they actually made an effort. They called me and said, hey, I'm running late, or they did whatever. Um, so for me, it's hard to exist in that gray area. But in a relationship, there's a lot in that gray area, I think.
yeah, it really comes down to again combining two different upbringings. That's really
Yeah.
what it really because you have to live in the gray because you are black and they are not in race, but you one
Noted.
person is black and one person's white, and the only thing in between is gray, right? So
Yeah.
the reality is like they are A and you are B. I have to change it
Yeah,
from black and white. Totally not making it a race thing, but
yeah.
there is gray when you combine two people together.
Yes.
What is another color? Red and green. Doesn't that make no? What is it? Blue and something makes green. What is
Blue and
those
red?
colors? Blue and red make green, right?
That's gotta be true.
Okay,
You heard it
so
here
I think
first.
so. Yeah, if it doesn't, it does not.
Yeah, don't at
So,
us, don't be sending emails.
but some two fucking combined two different situations makes a middle ground, and
Yeah.
that's the gray area, and or purple, or whatever the fucking colors you put together.
But
Um,
that's where I think, to back up your point, is like the effort is part of it, and my brain has
yeah,
always been like, you either succeeded or you failed. And
I
it
have the same mentality as you. I don't blame you because I feel like if someone asks me to do something, I either get it done or I make an excuse. And I know I
yeah,
could have made it done
yeah,
because we're like quick-witted, fast people. We do things like we get if we want it, we find a fucking way, you know?
yeah, yeah.
And so anytime we don't, and that's again black and white. Like we have the mentality that if you want something done, there's always a way and you can get it done. And
Mhm.
anytime we haven't, it's because we've made excuses. So we just assume the other person is the exact same way. But the other person, like, they could be completely opposite. Like that ex that I had, like he was just this really like he wasn't someone who was like go after it, make it get done. In general in life, he just kind of accepted things as they came. He put some effort into it. So he was different.
Mhm.
And so when you combine those two, there was a gray area. And the gray area would be him being on time as most as he possibly can, like let's say 3 times, and the fourth time he was late. That would have been a gray area,
Yeah.
and then I would appreciate the fact that okay, the 3 times before he was on time, it's okay this time.
I
Like
think what
I
you're
also
gonna
have to
run
be
into
flexible.
is you're on the far scale, pretty far on the scale of ambition. Like you're very ambitious, where a lot of people aren't. So I think your natural energy and things, you're gonna find that almost everybody has less than that. So I imagine that's a struggle, right? You're like, just fucking do. You were like that with me when
Yeah,
we were
yeah.
kids. Like I'm like having some sort of existential crisis or whatever. You're like Hakuna Matata. I'm like, the fuck is wrong with you, right? I'm like,
It's
oh,
funny
this
that you
crazy
say
thing is
that.
happening. You're like, oh, you ever tried not giving a shit about it? Oh, yeah. But it's not that you don't care, but you're just like, fucking do it, man. Do it. And now that I'm older, I adopt that philosophy of my friend. Like, I'm kind of the same way. If I don't do something, there's a fucking good reason. But like a lot of people aren't as ambitious as you or me, I guess. I don't know if the ambition is a word I would use for myself, but like ambitious in general. So I think you're probably going to find that you're going to have to compromise because most people aren't as driven. Like you're like, I'm going to move
They
to
don't.
LA and you're just fucking gone.
We're gone in two
I've been
weeks.
sitting here for 20 years talking about wanting to live in the States. Right. But what have I done about it? Less than nothing. I've done a
But
handful of complaining, right? But
I do agree with you. I do, and you know what? It is really hard because I have a hard time accepting the gray area and I'm always yelling at people, everyone, even my
yeah,
poor like parents. They're like, "We're 70, we can't do it." I'm like, "Why can't you do it?"
that's
Like,
loser talk.
yeah, Because I've
that's
never heard the word no. Like,
yeah.
if I hear no, I always feel like I just find someone else to get what I want and need, and I push, like I mean, something as simple as, like, my dad needed to be seen by a certain doctor that had a 5-year waiting list in Vancouver, and he
Later
wouldn't be
that
able to
afternoon.
well, he wouldn't have been able to get seen because if he was to have this surgery, if he was a candidate for it, which he wasn't anyways, but if he was a candidate for it, he wouldn't be able to do it at 80, you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I he needed to be seen, and no matter who we called, my parents like, they were like, "No, it's a 5-year waiting list." It was, like, 4.5 is the earliest, and I was like, "I don't care," and I it took me 3 months, but he got seen, and I remember the whole way, my parents like, "This is not how the system works here. This is just you have to be patient. You have," and I called, like, I can't even like, I it was 3 months of consistent like, my morning schedule was get up in the morning, and there was, like, 4 people to harass, like, like and and then he got seen, and he had a friend that also needed to be seen, and that guy's been on the wait list now for 2 years, and he's like, "How did you get it?" And it's funny because I to me, is like a natural trait to get what I need, and I don't hear no, and I don't hear excuses. So it is true when I date and someone's like, "Oh, it's just been really hard for me, and I can't figure this out." One thing I've had to learn is accept that people don't do things the way you do it,
Yeah.
and it's not always the best way. Like, I piss off a lot of people to get what I need, Like,
But you
and
have to. Like the people that really
but I'm
fucking
comfortable
make
with
it,
it.
like the people that really make it are the ones like you that are
Oh, no, I haven't
resilient,
made it, but thank you, but I
but
haven't made but I was something I had to understand, like, some people don't feel comfortable, like, my sister doesn't she feels it's a form of disrespect to keep pushing people, which is true, it's completely disrespectful, but I felt like for something that could benefit, like, my dad's health, like, I don't give a fuck who I piss off,
yeah.
Like,
Well,
it came to a point
you got to just know that like that's going to be in any relationship. I think you're going to find very few people are on the same level.
and it's not okay to do in everything, and that was a very hard thing to do, like, if you can do that like, I got to a point where his doctor wouldn't even take my calls, his actual family doctor, but I just will tell you, like, in a relationship, what's really hard is me taking the time to understand, like, just because I would do it one way doesn't mean somebody else would, and accepting it. Like,
Mhm.
it's okay, and you can't it's actually selfish of me, like, that's actually a selfish boundary to expect someone to be as pushy and aggressive to get to what they need, because that's not their natural state? So
Yeah.
and you're right, it's so hard, and it has been so hard, and it's something I work because like, I'll go on a date and a guy will, like, talk about something, like an issue, and it's like, "Well, why don't you just fucking fix it?"
Yeah.
And and then I realized it's actually me being the asshole, because you have to give people grace and know that they are different and they do things different and they have a comfort level. Like, my sister would never, ever, ever push someone past comfort in order to get what she needs, and
Yeah.
I sometimes try to push her to do it, and she's like, "That's not a" like, she would never call that doctor office 20,000 times,
Mhm.
Like, she would be like, "Give him time,"
I think
So
honestly though, it's like you can teach yourself to reel that in, but to teach someone to do that is much more difficult.
exactly, exactly, and
So
it's actually rude of me, it's rude, it's actually someone else has the right to set a boundary to say, "This is not my natural self," and that's right of them. They have the complete right. My expectation is actually selfish because it's justifying my need to get how I want something done.
but as long as you can direct that in the right direction, you can achieve a lot. It's just going to be hard if you're trying to like, apply that logic to a relationship.
Exactly, exactly. And I love that you say that because, like, honestly, like that has been one of the hardest things is, and I was constantly trying to find someone with that same mentality, and it's just not okay.
Yeah.
So, but I love it. I love it. This was a really good one. We should wrap this one up because we're at our mark. But
Mhm.
one thing we keep forgetting is telling people to subscribe and follow us at the perfect underscore X. That's the letter X on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. I don't care where else. I mean, we're not really tweeting, but
Yeah, we got Twitter. Get on the Twitter. Get on the got to twat at people.
yeah. Or what do they call it? X now or
X.
something?
It's
Yeah,
named after us.
yeah, the X. That's true. Actually, so you can go on our platform.
Don't Google that.
But yeah, and also, tell your friends about us. So yeah, that's
Yes, we're solving all your problems, so get down here.
it. And if you need me to push someone to get what you need done,
Yeah,
you
if you
can.
need someone
Yeah.
to convince someone that 2 plus 2 is 84, you got Sherry's number.
But yeah, but please follow us and tell your friends to listen and tune in. And
Mhm.
if you have any questions, I think in a couple weeks we'll do another question and answer
Yeah,
one.
we
But
should.
yeah, all right, cool. Well, thank you so much. I'll talk to you next week.
You bet. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.